I wasn't invited. And he said it like it meant nothing. If you've ever been ignored, underestimated, or taken for granted by your own family, don't look away. This story might feel uncomfortably familiar. It was Tuesday evening just after 6, the kind of winter dark that settles early and makes the kitchen feel smaller. I was standing by the sink, my hands still damp from rinsing a coffee mug, when he said it. No warning. No hesitation. Just slipped it into the conversation like an afterthought, as if he were telling me he'd already eaten. The wedding dinner was yesterday, Mom. Only important people were invited. I nodded. Fully. Calmly. I even wiped my hands on the towel before turning around. That reaction surprised him. I could tell by the way his shoulders stiffened, by the way his eyes flicked up from his phone to check my face. He expected something else. Tears maybe. Or questions. Or the soft disappointment he was used to managing. Instead, I gave him nothing. Not yet. The clock on the microwave read 6:12 p.m. The numbers glowed green, steady and indifferent. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on damp pavement. The house smelled faintly of onions from dinner I'd started and suddenly didn't feel hungry for. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary light. And something quietly irreversible had just happened. I turned back to the counter, folded the towel neatly and placed it on its hook. My heart was beating faster than usual, but I'd learned long ago how to keep that kind of thing private. Years of being the steady one will do that to a woman. Years of being needed then slowly ignored. Yesterday, I repeated, not as a question. Just a word. Letting it sit. Yes, he said. It was kind of small. Small. That was his word for it. Not family. Not intimate. Small. I watched his reflection in the dark window above the sink. He didn't look at me. He was scrolling again, thumb moving quickly as if the conversation were already over. That more than anything told me this wasn't an accident. You don't forget your mother by mistake. You decide she doesn't count. I felt something shift in my chest, not sharp like pain but heavy like a door closing. I had been excluded before in quieter ways. Missed group photos. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Plans made without asking if I could come. But this was different. This had witnesses. Candles. Plates set for people who mattered. I pulled out a chair and sat down. My knees complained as they always did in the cold, and I welcomed the familiar ache. Grounded me. Reminded me where I was. What time was it? I asked. He shrugged. Evening. 7 maybe. 7. I pictured it easily. A long table. Glasses clinking. Laughter rising when someone told a story from his childhood. A childhood I had lived inside of, cleaned up after, paid for. I imagined him smiling, comfortable, certain of his place among those important people. I wondered who explained my absence, or if anyone bothered. He finally looked up then. It wasn't a big deal, Mom. That sentence landed harder than the rest. Not because it hurt more but because it clarified everything. If it wasn't a big deal then neither was I. Not anymore. I felt my fingers curl slightly against the tabletop. The wood was cool and smooth, recently polished. I'd done that myself last Sunday, humming along to the radio, thinking about how proud I was that he was getting married. Thinking about what I might wear. Thinking about whether I should bring my old pearl necklace or something simpler. I hadn't been careless with my hopes. I'd been cautious. But I had still hoped. I see, I said. There was a pause. Not a comfortable one. He shifted his weight, slid his phone into his pocket and cleared his throat. I should probably get going. Of course he should. He had somewhere else to be. People waiting. A life that no longer needed me as part of its picture, only as background support. He stood, grabbed his jacket from the chair by the door. As he reached for the handle, he hesitated just for a moment. That hesitation mattered. It meant some part of him knew this wasn't right. But he didn't turn back. He didn't apologize. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound final and clean. I stayed at the table long after the house settled into silence. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. I listened to both, counting my breaths without meaning to. My chest felt tight but my mind was oddly clear. Clear enough to notice things I might have missed before. Like how the mail on the counter included an envelope with my maiden name printed neatly in the corner. Or how the folder beneath it, the one I kept tucked behind old manuals and warranties, sat exactly where I'd left it. Unopened. Waiting. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead I stood and finished making dinner. I chopped the onions I'd started earlier, slower this time, careful with my fingers. The knife made a steady, reassuring sound against the board. Each slice felt deliberate, controlled. As the pan warmed, I replayed the conversation in my head, not to torture myself but to understand it. The tone he used. The timing. The way he never once said he was sorry. This wasn't thoughtlessness. This was hierarchy. I had been ranked quietly and found lacking. That realization brought a strange sense of relief. When something finally has a name, you can stop pretending it's something else. I ate alone at the table, the chair across from me empty. I noticed a small stain near its leg, something I'd meant to clean and forgotten. Funny, the things that stand out when everything else falls away. I made a mental note to take care of it later. After dinner, I washed the dishes and dried them immediately, lining them up with care. I've always believed order is a kind of self-respect. When people stop seeing you, you still see yourself. I went into the living room and sat in my usual chair. The lamp beside it cast a soft circle of light, warm and familiar. This room had held so many seasons of my life. Laughter. Arguments. Long nights waiting for him to come home when he was younger. I had built this space to be safe. And it still was. For me. I picked up my phone, saw no new messages and set it back down. If he was going to reach out again, it wouldn't be tonight. He believed this was finished. A conversation closed. A box checked. He was wrong. Not because I was angry. Not because I wanted to punish him in that moment. But because something fundamental had changed. The rules he thought applied no longer did. He had mistaken my quiet for weakness. Many people do. I stood and walked to the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me had silver hair pulled back neatly, fine lines around her eyes, and a steadiness I recognized. I'd earned that face. Every year of it. I see you, I said softly. It wasn't for comfort. It was acknowledgement. The next morning I woke before dawn as I often do. The house was still, the air cool. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the light slowly creep across the floor. The events of the night before hadn't faded. They'd settled. Taken shape. When the phone rang mid-morning, I knew before answering that it wouldn't be an apology. His name lit up the screen, bright and confident. I let it ring twice before picking up. Mom, he said, his voice different now. Tight. I need to talk to you. I looked at the envelope on the counter. The folder beneath it. I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug and took a sip. Yes, I said. I'm listening. And for the first time since the night before, I smiled. He exhaled into the phone, not relief exactly, more like expectation. As if my willingness to listen meant I was already back in my old place. The place where I absorbed whatever urgency he brought me and turned it into a solution. I've got a situation, he said. I need your help. I stayed quiet. Not silent in the way that ends conversations, but quiet in the way that invites people to reveal more than they plan to. I learned that years ago, listening to doctors talk around diagnoses and bankers talk around numbers. How much time do you have? I asked. There was a pause. Papers shuffled on his end. I pictured him standing somewhere unfamiliar, maybe pacing, one hand running through his hair the way he did when he was nervous. That image didn't soften me the way it once would have. It just made things clearer. Not much, he said. I need $65,000. Soon. Soon was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Soon meant before questions were asked. Before consequences arrived. Soon meant he believed I would step in before things got uncomfortable for him. For what? I asked. It's complicated, he said quickly. Too quickly. There's an opportunity, but there's a gap and I just need to bridge it. A gap. That was his word for risk. For overreach. For assuming the world would bend the way it always had. I traced the rim of my mug with my thumb, feeling the faint chip I'd never bothered to fix. Imperfections don't scare you once you've lived long enough. I thought you said everything was stable, I said. It is, he replied. This is just temporary. Temporary. Another familiar word. Temporary had always meant permanent involvement for me. Temporary had meant years before. Tuition payments. Rent advances. Quiet transfers that never made it into family stories. I asked him who else he'd spoken to. He named 2 people. I noticed the one he didn't mention. The person he avoided naming told me more than the names he gave. I need to know today, he added, impatience creeping in now. The timing matters. I looked at the clock. Mid-morning light filled the kitchen, clean and honest. I thought about how he'd measured importance at that dinner table. Who sat where? Who was worth inviting? I'll need to look at a few things, I said. I can't promise anything. That threw him. I heard it in the sharp inhale, the shift in tone. Mom, it's not that complicated. It is to me, I said gently. This isn't a small amount. He laughed, short and strained. You always say that. Yes, I said. Because it always is. Another pause. I could feel him recalculating, adjusting his approach. He softened his voice, lowered it slightly. This was the version of him he used when he wanted reassurance wrapped in authority. You know, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, he said. Important. There it was again. The word he used so easily for himself. For his needs. For his timeline. I wondered if it ever crossed his mind how often I'd set my own importance aside without announcing it. I'll call you back, I said. Later today. Can you at least tell me if it's a yes? He pressed. I can tell you I'm thinking, I replied. He didn't like that answer, but he accepted it. The call ended with a clipped goodbye, not warm, not angry. Just transactional. That, more than anything, confirmed I was right to slow down. I sat there for a long moment after the screen went dark. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down. Not fear. Something closer to anticipation. Or maybe recognition. This was the moment everything tipped, even if he didn't know it yet. I stood and walked to the counter. The envelope was still there. So was the folder beneath it. I slid the envelope aside, not opening it yet, and pulled the folder toward me. The cardboard was worn at the edges, softened by time and handling. It felt solid in my hands. Familiar. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I poured myself more coffee and sat back down. I needed to be steady, not rushed. Decisions made in panic look different years later. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Outside, a neighbor started their car. The engine sputtered, then caught. Life continued, indifferent to my private turning point. That steadied me more than anything else. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in a long time. Not because I'd forgotten them, but because I hadn't needed to remember. Papers tied to moments when I'd stepped in quietly, when things might have fallen apart without my involvement. Agreements. Statements. Signatures that carried my name. My maiden name. I smiled faintly at that. Not pride. Recognition. That name belonged to a woman who had learned to stand on her own before anyone asked her to support them. The phone rang again while I was still reading. Not him this time. A number I recognized immediately. Someone who always called mid-morning like clockwork. Good morning, she said. You sound distracted. I am, I admitted. Is everything all right? I considered how much to say. I didn't need advice. I needed clarity. I think I'm being asked to fix something that isn't mine to fix anymore. She hummed softly. That's a hard place to be. Yes, I said. But also a clear one. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. Weather, appointments, the comfort of routine. When we hung up, I felt steadier. Less alone. I gathered the papers back into the folder and carried it into the living room, setting it on the table beside my chair. The light had shifted now, afternoon edging closer. Time moved whether I was ready or not. My phone buzzed with a message. From him. Any update? I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Leaves skittered along the curb, pushed by a cold breeze. Change always announces itself in small ways first. I thought about all the times I'd answered quickly. All the times I'd prioritized his urgency over my own sense of balance. I wasn't angry about those choices. They'd been mine. But I didn't owe him their repetition. I picked up the phone and typed a single line. I'm still reviewing things. It was enough. It had to be. I set the phone down again and returned to the folder, opening it wider this time. Not to act yet. Just to understand. Knowledge changes posture. It straightens your spine. As evening approached, the house filled with long shadows. I turned on a lamp, the same one I'd sat beside the night before. Everything felt connected now. Not dramatic. Just aligned. When the phone rang again, I let it ring longer this time before answering. Yes. I said. His voice was sharper now. I really need an answer. I know, I replied. So do I. That confused him. I could hear it. The imbalance had begun, subtle but real. I'll call you tomorrow, I added. After I finish looking at everything. There was a beat of silence. Then, okay, he said, uncertain. I hung up first. As the room settled back into quiet, I realized something had already shifted. Not outside. Inside me. The power hadn't returned all at once. It had simply stopped leaving. As the room settled back into quiet, I realized something had already shifted, and that stillness followed me as I carried the folder back to the table and opened it with care. I did not rush. I had learned, over decades, that haste usually belonged to people who expected to be rescued. I expected nothing. I spread the papers slowly, aligning edges, smoothing corners, letting my hands remember the weight of responsibility they once carried without complaint. The lamp cast a soft yellow pool across the wood, and dust motes floated through it like they had nowhere better to be. The first document was old, dated from a year when my knees did not ache and my hair was still mostly dark. I remembered the day I signed it. The office had smelled like burnt coffee and toner. I had been nervous but not uncertain. Back then, being careful was still mistaken for being unkind. I traced my finger along my signature. The name surprised me every time. Not the married one. The other. The one I had almost lost. Seeing it there felt like running into an old friend who never stopped believing in me even when I doubted myself. I heard the refrigerator click off in the kitchen. The house breathed around me, settling deeper into evening. I thought about how often I had handled things quietly without announcing my effort because it seemed easier than explaining why help was needed at all. Another paper followed. Then another. Each one carried a memory I had packed away neatly, the way women of my generation were taught to do. No dramatics. No complaints. Just competence applied steadily until problems shrank or disappeared. At the bottom of the stack was a thin envelope, creased at the corner. Inside was a statement I had not expected to matter again. I read it twice. Not to reassure myself but to confirm what I already knew. Some preparations age well. Others wait patiently. My phone vibrated on the table. I did not pick it up. I watched it settle back into stillness and felt a small, unfamiliar pleasure at not responding immediately. Time I was learning could be claimed. I stood and went to the hallway, opening the closet where I kept boxes labeled in careful handwriting. Texas. Difference. Medical. The box I needed sat on the top shelf. I stretched, feeling the pull along my side and brought it down slowly. Inside were folders organized by year. I flipped through them, pausing when a receipt slipped free and fluttered to the floor. I bent to pick it up, steadying myself on the doorframe, and laughed softly at my own reflection in the mirror opposite me. You plan well, I thought. Even when no one thanked you. A knock sounded at the door, unexpected and sharp. I froze, listening. It came again, lighter this time. I closed the box and set it on the bench before opening the door. My neighbor stood there, holding a misdelivered package. She smiled apologetically. We exchanged a few words, nothing important, but her presence reminded me that the world still moved at a normal pace outside my private reckoning. When the door closed again, I felt more grounded. Less dramatic. This was not revenge. This was alignment. I returned to the table and arranged the documents into a neat stack. One paper showed a connection I had almost forgotten. Another clarified a responsibility that had quietly ended years ago. Each detail mattered. Not because I intended to act yet, but because understanding restores balance. The phone rang. I checked the number before answering. Not him. Someone else tied to an earlier decision. I answered cautiously. Yes, I said. The voice on the other end was familiar, professional, polite. We spoke briefly. I asked questions I had never thought to ask before. The answers did not shock me, but they settled something that had been loose for too long. After the call, I sat back and closed my eyes. My shoulders ached. My hands felt tired. But beneath that was a steadiness I had not felt in years. I made myself tea and carried it to the living room. The chair welcomed me like it always had. I rested the folder on my lap and looked through the last section, slower now, letting the past arrange itself without judgment. I remembered nights when I had lain awake, calculating, worrying, choosing the option that would cause the least disruption. I had been protecting peace. Or so I told myself. The truth was simpler. I had been protecting everyone else. The realization did not make me angry. It made me honest. By the time the sky outside turned deep blue, I had finished reading. I placed the papers back into their folders, then into the box, then returned the box to its place. Not hidden. Sort. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. Short. Impatient. I did not reply. Instead I stood, stretched my stiff legs and turned off the lamp. The room darkened, but I did not feel lost. I felt prepared. Whatever came next would meet a woman who remembered exactly who she was and what she had already survived. I went back to the kitchen and washed my mug, listening to the water run longer than necessary. The sound filled the space and gave my thoughts somewhere to rest. I dried the cup carefully and set it upside down on the towel, noticing how methodical my movements had become. Precision calmed me. It always had. At the small desk near the window, I pulled out a notebook I used for appointments and grocery lists. On a clean page, I wrote down questions. Not accusations. Questions. Each one simple. Each one grounded in fact. Writing them slowed my breathing and steadied my hands. I did not need to decide anything tonight. I only needed to see clearly. The house creaked as it cooled, familiar noises that had once comforted me during storms and power outages. I remembered teaching him how to listen to those sounds, how to tell when the furnace kicked on, how to know the difference between settling wood and trouble. Somewhere along the way he stopped listening. I checked the locks, a habit I kept even in safe neighborhoods. The front door, the back, the windows. Each click felt like punctuation. A sentence ending. Another beginning. Back in the living room, I sat again and allowed myself a moment to feel the weight of it all. The disappointment. The clarity. The strange calm that followed both. My chest tightened then eased. I breathed through it, counting the way I had learned to do during long waits in sterile rooms. I picked up my phone and opened the message without responding. His words were brief, demanding, written as if urgency itself were proof of merit. I set the phone face down. I would not let it dictate the rhythm of my evening. Instead, I opened a drawer and took out a small box containing keepsakes. Not valuables. Reminders. A note in a child's handwriting. A photograph with edges worn soft. Proof of years that had required patience more than applause. I did not linger, but I acknowledged them. They belonged to me, not to any ledger. When I returned the box, I noticed the folder on the table again and felt no rush to touch it. That too was new. I trusted myself to act when the time came. Trust had been missing for a long while. Outside, a dog barked once and went silent. A porch light flicked on across the street. Ordinary life continuing. I took comfort in that. I turned on the television for background noise, then muted it. I preferred the quiet. It allowed thoughts to surface and pass without grabbing hold. Before bed, I wrote one more line in the notebook, then closed it and placed it beside my chair. Tomorrow would bring conversations. Explanations requested. Pressure applied. I would meet them rested. As I switched off the lights and made my way down the hall, I caught my reflection again. The woman looking back did not look defeated. She looked awake. In the bedroom, I set the alarm and slipped under the covers. The sheets were cool and clean. I lay there, hands folded, listening to the house settle. Sleep came slowly, but it came. When sleep loosened its hold, the quiet was different, heavier somehow, as if the house itself were holding its breath with me. I lay still for a moment, listening. The furnace clicked on, then off. Somewhere down the street a truck passed, its sound low and distant. My body felt stiff, but my mind was alert, already moving. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there, grounding myself before standing. That small pause mattered. It always had. In the kitchen, morning light slipped in through the blinds, pale and cautious. I made coffee and drank it slowly, feeling the warmth travel through me. The phone sat on the counter, face up, quiet for now. I did not check it. I had learned the difference between readiness and anticipation. By mid-morning the first call came. Not from him. From someone adjacent to his life, close enough to feel the tremor, distant enough to speak carefully. The voice was polite, measured, carrying questions disguised as concern. "I just wanted to see if you'd heard anything," she said. "Heard what?" I asked. She hesitated. That told me more than words. Something had shifted. Not collapsed yet, but unsettled. I said very little, let her fill the space, then wished her well and ended the call. I did not feel triumphant. I felt observant. The second call came an hour later. This one was sharper. Family has a way of skipping pleasantries when they sense imbalance. Accusations hovered just beneath the surface, but I answered calmly, neutrally, as if discussing weather. "I'm not involved," I said, and meant it in a new way. After that, the phone stayed quiet for a while. I took advantage of the lull to step outside and collect the mail. The air was crisp. Leaves crunched beneath my shoes. Ordinary sensations grounded me as the world beyond my door began to wobble. When I returned inside, there was a message waiting. His name. Short words. No greeting. A question mark where patience should have been. I did not respond. Instead, I sat at the table and paid bills, something I had always done with care. Numbers steady the mind. They remind you that consequences are real and measurable. As I worked, another message arrived, longer this time. Frustration leaking through the phrasing. I read it once. Then again. I noted what he did not say. No apology. No reflection. Only urgency, sharpened now by resistance. By afternoon, the calls resumed. One from a relative I hadn't spoken to in months. Another from someone connected to his work. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Concern. Confusion. A careful probe for information. I offered none. What surprised me was not how quickly word traveled but how quickly tone changed. Respect had a way of returning when certainty disappeared. Voices softened. Questions became cautious. I felt no need to correct their assumptions. Late in the day he finally called. I answered on the third ring. "Why aren't you answering me?" he demanded. "I am," I said. "Now." There was a sound on his end, something knocked over, then righted. He was pacing. I could hear it in his breathing. "Things are getting complicated," he said. "I imagined they would," I replied. He stopped short. Silence stretched between us, tense and unfamiliar. I could almost feel him recalibrating, searching for the version of me that would smooth this over. "Did you do something?" he asked. "No," I said. "I stopped doing something." That landed. I heard it in the way his breath caught just briefly. He recovered quickly but not completely. "This isn't the time for this," he said. I looked out the window at the lengthening shadows. "It's the only time," I answered. He raised his voice then just a little. Enough to test. Enough to see if I would shrink. I did not. I waited him out. When he realized volume would not move me, he changed tactics. "I'm under a lot of pressure," he said. "So was I replied. "For a long time." He exhaled sharply. "What do you want?" That question revealed more than he intended. He assumed this was a negotiation. That everything had a price. "I want you to listen," I said. He scoffed, but quieter now. "I am listening." "No," I said. "You're waiting." Another pause. He did not argue this time. We ended the call without resolution. Not angry. Not calm. Suspended. I set the phone down and noticed my hands were steady. That mattered. As evening approached, I felt the fatigue settle in. Not exhaustion but the weight of sustained attention. I warmed leftovers and ate standing at the counter, uninterested in ceremony. My appetite was light but present. The phone buzzed again. A message from someone else. Then another. Each one carried fragments of the same story. Meetings postponed. Decisions questioned. Confidence shaken. I did not celebrate. I observed. Later, a knock sounded at the door. Unexpected but not surprising. A familiar face stood there, concern etched deep. We spoke briefly on the porch, voices low. Questions asked. Answers deflected. "I just don't understand what's happening," she said. "I do," I replied gently. When she left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a moment. My knees protested. My heart thudded. I breathed through it. This was not easy, but it was necessary. Back in the living room, I sat with the lamp on and the television muted. The room felt smaller now, charged. I thought about all the times I had absorbed chaos to keep things smooth. How strange it felt to let it ripple outward instead. Another call came. This one shorter. His voice lower. "People are asking questions," he said. "They always do," I replied. "What am I supposed to tell them?" I considered that. "Tell them the truth," I said. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know that's not simple." "It never is," I said. We ended that call quickly. I felt no urge to chase him with reassurance. The imbalance needed room to exist. As night settled in, the house grew quiet again. I moved through it slowly, turning off lights, checking locks. Familiar rituals took on new meaning. I was not bracing for impact. I was standing firm. I sat once more in my chair, hands folded, listening to the low hum of the house. Somewhere his world was shifting, plates sliding, supports wobbling. I did not push. I did not pull. I simply stopped holding it up. That was enough for now. And I stayed seated, listening to the quiet settle deeper around me as the phone lay still on the table. The house felt alert, as if it too understood that something final was approaching. I rested my hands in my lap and allowed my breathing to slow, knowing the next step would not come from force, but from presence. It rang once more just after sunrise, not sharp this time but careful, as if even the sound knew things had changed. I answered without standing. I did not rush. My voice came out steady, lower than usual, grounded in something new that did not need to explain itself. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You can come here." I hung up before he could add conditions. That was important. The invitation was simple, clear, and on my terms. I went about my morning slowly, opening curtains, rinsing a cup, setting 2 chairs at the table. Not in hospitality but in intention. This was not a meeting to negotiate. It was a reckoning to be witnessed. He arrived an hour later. I watched his car pull into the driveway through the living room window, noticed how he sat inside it for a moment before getting out. That pause told me everything. He was no longer certain of his footing. The confidence he once wore so easily had cracked and uncertainty had seeped through. When he knocked, I opened the door fully and stepped aside. I did not invite him in with words. I didn't need to. He walked past me slowly, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes lingered on details he had once dismissed. The lamp. The chair. Fable. "You look tired," I said. "So do you," he replied, defensive out of habit. "Yes," I said. But only one of us finally slept. That unsettled him. We sat across from each other at the table. The same one where he had told me I wasn't important. The morning light filled the space evenly, leaving nowhere to hide, no shadows to soften the truth. "Things are falling apart," he said. "I know," I replied. His hands rested flat on the table now, palms down as if anchoring himself. "People are asking questions. They're looking at contracts. Things I thought were settled aren't." I nodded. Stability borrowed always feels permanent until the owner stands up. He stared at me then, really stared, as if waiting for anger or satisfaction or fear. I offered none of it. My calm seemed to disturb him more than shouting ever could have. "I don't understand how this happened," he said. "That's because you never asked how things stayed together," I said. "You assumed they always would." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I reached for the folder and placed it on the table between us. I didn't open it yet. I let the weight of it speak first. Years of quiet decisions rested inside. "For a long time," I continued, "you believed help was automatic. You mistook my silence for obligation." His jaw tightened. "Are you saying this is your doing?" "I'm saying this is the absence of my doing," I replied. "And there's a difference." He laughed once, sharply. "That's not fair." "Neither was being erased," I said. I opened the folder and slid a single document toward him. "Not everything. Just enough." His eyes scanned the page, then widened slightly. Recognition dawned slowly, painfully, like light entering a room that had been shut for years. "This can't be right," he said. "It is," I answered. "You signed it." "I signed it. You just forgot who held the pen." He flipped to the next page, hands shaking now. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. I noticed the way his shoulders curved inward, the way his certainty collapsed without anyone pushing it. "You could have warned me," he said. "I did," I replied. "Every time I asked to be seen." He looked up at me, eyes glossy, confused. "Why now?" "Because you told me who mattered," I said quietly. And I finally listened. Silence fell. Not empty. The kind of silence that rearranges people. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I know," I replied. "You just didn't think about me at all." That truth landed harder than anger ever could. He lowered his head, elbows on the table, hands covering his face. I watched him breathe through it the way I had taught him when he was small, counting under his breath without realizing it. After a moment he looked up. "What happens now?" I closed the folder and rested my hands on it. "Now you live with what you chose," I said. "And you learn how to stand without leaning on me." His voice was small when he spoke again. I don't know if I can fix this. I do, I said. But I won't do it for you. He sat back, staring at the wall, absorbing the shape of his future without me cushioning every fall. I could see the conflict in him, the urge to argue battling the understanding that there was nothing left to debate. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated at the door, hand resting on the frame. I never thought you'd let go, he said. I didn't, I replied. I held on to myself. He left without asking for help. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, my knees trembling, my chest tight. Relief washed through me, sharp and clean, followed by a grief that did not undo my resolve. Both were allowed. I stayed there until my breathing evened out and my legs felt steady again. The afternoon unfolded in a new rhythm. Calls came from relatives and acquaintances, slower now, tentative. I answered politely and said very little. Some apologized. Some avoided eye contact even through the phone. Each response confirmed what I already knew. Respect arrives when access ends. I noticed how my body reacted to each interaction. No tightness in my chest. No racing thoughts. Just a quiet awareness. I had crossed something invisible, and there was no desire to return. One message stood out, not pleading, just honest. It acknowledged my absence, not my usefulness. I read it twice, then set the phone down. That small recognition mattered more than any apology I had imagined. As the evening deepened, I stepped outside briefly, feeling the cool air on my face. The street was calm. Houses lit softly. Life continuing without asking permission. I realized then that my worth had never been tied to how often I was needed. It had always existed, waiting for me to claim it without apology or explanation. I stood there longer than necessary, breathing in the quiet, letting the last traces of doubt fall away. I was not angry. I was finished. Finished carrying what was never mine. Finished shrinking myself to make others comfortable. Finished confusing love with obligation. Finished apologizing for taking up space. Finished explaining myself to people who never listened. As evening approached, I made a simple dinner and ate it at the table alone. The same table. The power in that was not lost on me. I was no longer waiting for a place to be offered. When night settled, I turned off the lights one by one and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the house breathe. I felt older and lighter at the same time. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the light move across the floor, feeling something settle into place inside me. For the first time in years, my silence belonged to me. And that was everything. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe for more powerful stories about strength, betrayal, and quiet revenge, because some lessons deserve to be told.